Welcome to the Designer Practice Podcast. I'm your host, Kayla Das, and I am a Canadian social worker, business coach, and private practice owner. I love all things systems, strategies, and step-by-step processes, helping therapists and coaches design a private practice that doesn't only provide practice profitability, but also the time freedom that they had initially set out to achieve. In this podcast, we'll discuss everything from private practice startup to passive income to building automated systems so that you spend less time inside of your practice and more time outside of it doing the things that you love. Let's dive in. If you're a Canadian clinical supervisor, then you'll want to hear this. Have you been having a difficult time finding clinical supervisees? Maybe you have individual or group clinical supervision spots available, but not sure how or where to advertise them. Well, we're in the process of creating a brand new therapist directory specifically for therapists to connect with clinical supervisors across Canada. As a Canadian therapist myself, I know all too well how hard it can be to find a clinical supervisor when you're looking for one. And as a business coach, I've heard from so many of you how hard it can be for clinical supervisors to promote their available clinical supervision spots. So, the Canadian Clinical Supervision Therapist Directory was born. Similar to traditional client-focused directories, the Canadian Clinical Supervision Therapist Directory is designed to connect therapists with their next clinical supervisor. Although our site is still under construction, I invite you to sign up to the waitlist so that you're the first to know when our directory goes live. Once live, we'll be offering a limited time, low-fee subscription rate to founding members of $9.99 per month Canadian dollar to clinical supervisors who provide clinical supervision to Canadian therapists. And don't worry, by joining the waitlist, you are not committing to anything, only to receive emails when we're about to go live. So, to sign up for the Canadian Clinical Supervision Therapist Directory waitlist, head to our website at canadianclinicalsupervision.ca. That's canadianclinicalsupervision.ca, or scroll down to the show notes and click on the link. Welcome back to the Designer Practice Podcast, and I'm your host, Kayla Das. In today's episode, Jennie Schottmiller, chartered professional accountant and licensed marriage and family therapist and owner of Simple Profit, will share the top tasks that practice owners need to master to be successful in business. Hi, Jennie. Welcome to the show. I'm so glad to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.
Jennie, before we dive into today's episode, please introduce yourself, where you're from, and tell us a little bit about your own business journey and the fact that you're a CPA and a licensed marriage family therapist. That's an interesting combination. So tell us a little bit about that.
So I was a CPA certified public accountant. It was my first profession. And I did that for a while, and it just wasn't super satisfying. And I had reasons to go to therapy, and I went to therapy for several years, and it really changed my life. And my last day walking out of my therapist's office, I thought, what a cool job. But I was a single mom and couldn't really switch careers at that time. So I thought at some point, maybe I'll become a therapist. And then I had the opportunity to become a therapist a few years later and actually switch careers. So I just put accounting behind me, and thankfully you don't have to have a psychology undergrad to go to master's in marriage and family therapy. It took me 6 years to get my license because I had little kids at home and some older kids, and I just work only part-time. So it took me 6 years. And when I finally opened my private practice, I started hanging out with other therapists for case consultation. And that is where I found out how much there is a need for mental health clinicians to have help on the business side, budgeting, understanding estimated taxes, managing their cash flow. And those topics regularly came up while we were really meeting for case consultation. And so that sort of started me on a path to starting my business, where I initially did some courses and a little bit of coaching. And then it just grew and grew and grew. And I do provide this service for more than just mental health clinicians, any kind of small business. A lot of people have the same need. We'll hear therapists say all the time, well, we didn't get this in graduate school. We didn't get this in graduate school. We didn't get this in graduate school. Well, guess what? Almost nobody that starts a small business has this unless they are starting out like financial or business type business, because then they obviously went to business school. Usually people are starting a yoga studio, a landscape company. They're starting these businesses that they have some skills in, or they want to provide this service to the public. And that service to the public is not accounting or taxes. So a lot of small businesses need this type of help. And what I do that's different than other CPAs might help with bookkeeping, might do taxes. I do the education part, because you do need the background to understand the concepts before you outsource and just leave it to someone else, because you don't want to leave the key components of your business in someone else's hands unchecked. And a lot of the things that you need to do, rather than outsourcing and spending $500 a month, you might be able to do it in less than an hour once a month. And you really only save yourself sometimes 30 minutes when you outsource something, because if you outsource it and they spend an hour doing it, you still need to spend maybe 20 or 30 minutes reviewing it to make sure that it was done correctly. At the end of the year, you're going to take these numbers and you're going to put them on your taxes and you're going to sign. And that tax return, by signing it, you're saying those numbers are accurate. If you haven't been connected to the numbers, and I show people how it's not as scary as you think and not as complicated as it feels initially, you sign off on those numbers as accurate and you're telling the government that they're correct, and you want to feel confident that they are. So that's where I help. The day-to-day business stuff, the knowledge that you need to have to either supervise or do the work yourself. So you get to the end of the year, you know what you made, you know that your taxes are accurate, and it really helps you manage your business.
Taxes and all the money aspects of business is probably one of the number one things I get asked in my business coaching. But to be fair, I'm not an expert with numbers. I outsource mine to my accountant. So I am so excited about today's episode, because that aspect of it, and especially where you're coming from, both worlds, the CPA world as well as the therapy world, there's not a lot of people like you out there. There's either CPAs or therapists. So this is fabulous. So first of all, how would you define a successful business or practice?
So to me, a successful business or practice that it meets the income profit goals of the owner. We a lot of times use the word income, but income can be defined differently. Some people think about their income as the money they get in from clients, which we would also call revenue. And sometimes people say income as the money that I received after I paid all the taxes and everything. Well, that's your income after taxes, but your profit is the revenue you get in from clients or patients, less the business expenses that it cost you to earn that money. So things that you had to expend to earn that money is your profit. And you want your business to meet the profit goals that you set out. What do you need to live on? What do you need to save? What do you need to save for retirement? Now, your business won't do that at the beginning. And so we don't expect our business to be successful day one, but we want to reach a goal so that we can live and save and feel good about that amount. The other thing I think defines whether something's successful is that the owner feels confident in the services that they're providing, as well as the back end processes, whether that's billing or accounting or the EHR management. You want to feel confident. You don't want to feel like you have avoidance or really a lot of disdain. You don't have to love it, but you don't want it to be a huge drag on your experience as a business owner, because one of the wonderful things about being a business owner is the flexibility. And if there are a lot of things that are really difficult that you avoid and pile up and you can't deal with them, we all know what happens when you get behind on your notes. Well, that same thing can happen when you're behind on your accounting or behind on your billing, because you're avoiding it because you don't like it. So a successful practice is you are confident in those activities and that you, the owner, drive those processes. You might outsource, you might have help, you might have a team, you might have a group practice, but that you drive those processes rather than walking through your business day to day doing what you were told you should do. because you will not have as much fun. You will not enjoy being self-employed as much if everything that you're doing, or even a large portion of what you're doing, is driven by what other people told you you had to do.
That makes complete sense. Are there any common mistakes that therapists do when it comes to, say, the accounting or the finance side that you see quite often?
Yeah, I'm going to start with saying something that's a normal, typical part of the process is that you don't necessarily start your practice on day one being on top of it. There are people who do. There are people who come to me for coaching, for example, or use my resources to learn everything before they actually start. But most of us actually start the business, and day one, we're not doing bookkeeping. We're like, okay, well, I guess I know what everything is, but I'll deal with it later. And that's typical. That's okay. That is fine. You want to, within the first year of your business, before you do your first round of taxes with your business, really start to get a sense of what's going on with bookkeeping and estimated taxes. So the mistakes that I see are people who, one, are told, well, you need to be this, you need to be an LLC, you need to be an S Corp, you have to do this. And that is an option. A sole proprietor is an option, LLC is an option, S Corp is an option. Using a spreadsheet for your accounting is an option, using QuickBooks is an option, using Wave Apps is an option. There are a lot of things that are options. So it's not necessarily a mistake because it's so difficult to get a handle on the difference between a rule and a preference. And a lot of times people advising you, whether they're accountants or an attorney or another colleague, they will say, well, you have to use QuickBooks Online. That actually what they're saying is, I like QuickBooks Online. Or they'll say, you have to be an S Corp. Well, they're saying, I want to bill you more because if you're an S Corp, I can charge you higher fees. Or I think it's best for you, but I didn't really take any time to decide what's best for you. I didn't have a process that I went through and said, okay, which is the best form of business for you? I just told you my favorite. And then you think that you have to. Now, there are things that are rules. You need to file your taxes. You have to pay tax on the money. There are certain things you can deduct, and there are certain things you can't deduct. Those are rules. Discerning what is a rule versus an option is where people make most of their mistakes. Another one that's really common and basic that people make is not opening up a business bank account. Like, oh, it's extra work. I don't want to have to track all that separate. It's going to end up in my account anyway. Or I didn't really think of it. You really need a business bank account because if you are ever audited, they're going to want your business documents, including your bank statements. And if you're like, well, it's all mixed in here with my personal stuff, you have way more personal transactions than you have business transactions. A small starting out practice might have like 10 transactions a month in their business, but they might go to the grocery store like 30 times and Target and Amazon and all these things. When you have to go back at the end of the year and identify which of your transactions are business, and they're all mixed in with your personal thing, or if you're ever audited, you have to give them your personal bank statements with everything there. They're not going to have a sense that you do a really good job of keeping things separated. And then they're going to think, well, maybe you're not so good at just only deducting the business things that you're supposed to. Well, the more likely issue is that you're going to miss deductions. There's going to be something you put, oh, I put on that personal card. I thought I got everything from this personal card, but it was really on that personal card. And at the end of the year, you didn't get the deduction. So opening a business bank account is something people skip over, but it's a really important step. And I do have on my website, which we'll talk about at the end, sort of like starting your business, the steps to go through. And you want to just go through those intentionally. Not necessarily again day one. Maybe you've been in business for 6 months. Maybe you've been in business 18 months. But when you get to that point where you're ready to say, oh, did I cover all my bases? Go through them intentionally and make your choices for what's best for you.
That's fabulous. And I'm even thinking of the business bank account. Now, I'm not sure if this is similar in the US, but here in Canada, when someone sends you an e-transfer, it actually has the client's name on it. So if you had, say, a bank account, maybe it's your personal bank account, and it's shared with your partner or your kid or somebody, then you have transfers coming in with client's name on it, and your partner or whoever you have a shared bank account is going to see that.
Well, and even when it's your business account, I usually recommend trying to avoid those types of payments that get the client name on there because in the US, and I don't know if this is the case in Canada, if you go to apply for a mortgage, they sometimes ask to see your business statements If you have to collect money, sometimes there is client or patient names in there. That doesn't necessarily extend to I had to buy a home and the mortgage broker had to look at my statements, and sometimes they won't let you redact it. So you'd still want to be careful, but you're correct. If it's in your personal account, more people are likely to see it than if it is in your business account.
Yeah, that's a really great point. The other point I also have when you talked about the requirements versus options, and I love that you highlighted that because that goes back to why I created the Designer Practice podcast, is so that people realize that you can create your business whatever way you want to. Of course, there is some requirements, i.e., you need to pay taxes. There's no ands, if, or buts about that. But how you set up the structure, whether it's a sole proprietor, whether it's a corporation, whether it's a partnership, all of those types of structures are your choice. I try to say this is what I prefer and this is why I prefer it. But yeah, sometimes we're like, this is how it has to be. And then they're like, oh, I don't like that. That doesn't fit my business. And I think that that's important to know that anyone who gives you advice or suggestions are coming from their point of view, not necessarily your point of view.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of times professionals don't take the time to lay out the pros and cons of each option so that you can really choose. Like when I'm trying to help someone choose an accounting system, I will show videos that show you this is what it's like to use a spreadsheet. And I'm visual, and a lot of us are visual. When you see it, you're like, clearly this is the better one. And people aren't choosing the same one, but they can discern so much more easily what is better when they have either the list of pros and cons or a visual of what it's like, and they really can imagine doing it or imagine having to file a corporate return versus if I'm a sole proprietor, like the extra complexities, maybe I get this out of it. Now I don't want complex. And so when you really can mirror the pros and cons or the differences against your preferences and who you are as a person, the business that you're forming, the answers usually seem clearer.
I agree 100%. So, what are the top tasks that practice owners need to master to be successful in practice?
So, one of the top tasks is bookkeeping, and a lot of people don't want to learn the bookkeeping. But what I always tell people is it's literally taking your income that you got from clients and putting it into income buckets. If you're private pay and you just have one source, you take Square or PayPal or Stripe, and you just have one source, then you're just saying everything that I got from them that was from clients is going to go into a line item called income or revenue. And then I'm going to put my expenses into buckets. So I'm going to put things like paper and pens and printer ink into something I'm going to call office expenses. And if I have an online profile that how clients find me on, website, SEO, ads, it's all going to go into advertising and marketing. And if I have my malpractice insurance, I'm going to have an insurance bucket for an expense bucket. If I go to a business trip, I'm going to have some travel categories, maybe airfare, hotel, travel meals. And so you're taking these expenses, you know what they are. Your bookkeeper could guess, and sometimes they're going to know. Like you can tell your bookkeeper, if you see this type of insurance company, that's my malpractice insurance. And then they'll remember that forever. They'll have it written down or something, but unless it changes. But if you go buy something on Amazon or you went out for a meal, they don't know if it's a personal meal or a business meal. They don't know if it's for your staff or yourself. They don't know if it's for travel meal or an in-town meeting with a colleague and networking. And so you have to explain that stuff to them. When you do it yourself, you know right where it needs to go as soon as you have a general understanding of here's my buckets and here's what goes in my buckets. And there's probably a max 20 buckets that most small practices have at most. And some of them you're not using very often. It's probably 5 to 10 or 15, maybe more if you have a group practice that you're using all the time. But that's not that many. And when you know what goes in there, and usually I help people set them up in a very logical way. So it makes sense. If it says business meals, you know what that is. If it says insurance, you know what that is. And once you know that, it's just bucketing your transactions. I pay myself, that goes in owner pay. I pay my taxes, that's owner pay estimated taxes or owner's taxes. So learning that is one of the top tasks you want to master. Then if you decide that you want to outsource it, you've now understood how much time it takes and what's involved. And you can really well determine if that price that they're charging you is worth it to you. Now, hopefully their price is set at the value of the service that they're offering and what they need to make. But that might not match up with what you want to pay because you know it only takes you an hour. And if they do it, it's still going to take you a half hour because you have to tell them about what the Amazon stuff was. And you also have to review their work and make sure that they did a good job. And you also have to see what you made so that you can decide how much to pay yourself and how much you're going to pay in taxes. So to me, mastering that, either the supervising of the bookkeeping or doing it yourself, is one of the most basic things you need to learn. The other is knowing what you can deduct. So wherever you're located, whether it's US or Canada, what can you count as a business expense versus personal? And one of the reasons that you need to know that is because when you go to do your taxes, if you have someone helping you prepare your taxes who's a professional, and they start recommending you deduct things that are more personal and not really allowed under the tax rules, then you can catch that and you can determine that you have not the best tax preparer. And there are unscrupulous tax preparers out there. They're happy to have you have extra deductions because you'll pay less tax. If you pay less tax, then they can charge you a higher fee because you're so happy that you're paying less tax that they can charge you more. So there is this built-in incentive for people to fudge the numbers on deductions. You don't have to know every tax rule. You don't have to be a tax professional, but you want to be able to spot red flags. In any professional relationship, you want to be able to spot red flags. And if you can spot red flags, you're going to be fine because you're going to be like, wow, this person is telling me no to this and yes to this and no to this and yes to this. And that really fits with the basic understanding that I have. No red flags. Don't worry, don't lose sleep. People worry a lot about the government coming after you. But if you can spot some red flags and know the basics, that you're going to be fine. You're not going to need to lose sleep or worry about that.
Are you looking for affordable therapy training courses? Then you'll love PESI Courses. PESI is a nonprofit organization that aims to provide affordable training for healthcare professionals. Because I'm a true fan of PESI Courses, PESI and I have partnered to offer an exclusive discount to you on select therapist-related courses, which includes but not limited to courses in DBT, EMDR, trauma, and even clinical supervision. To check out PESI Courses today and to receive your exclusive discount, head to kayladas.com/PESI. That's kayladas.com/PESI, or you can simply scroll down to the show notes and click on the link. Now back to our episode.
Another one is paying your taxes as you go. I assume you do this in Canada too, because governments generally know that if you wait till the end of the year, it's such a huge tax burden that it's hard for people to pay it, and then fewer people will be current on their tax bills. That's why we withhold taxes from paychecks. And estimated taxes is nothing more than the equivalent of having money withheld from your paycheck. If you went back to the last time you had a job for an employer and you added up what got withheld from your paycheck for the entire year, it would be a whopping number that you would never want to pay all at once. And in the US, estimated taxes are only due 4 times a year, but you could pay them more often if you want. I assume it's something similar in Canada. And you want to have a general understanding, even if all you know right now is that I got to give some money to the government throughout the year so that I don't have a gigantic tax burden that I cannot pay at the end of the year. Okay, I got 2 more. One is how to pay yourself from the business. The money that you make from your business, the profit after you pay the bills, get the money from clients, pay the bills, is going to go at least some of it to you, maybe all of it to you if you're just starting out. But over time, you want some of it to go into your savings, some of it to go to you for living expenses, and some of it to go into your retirement or other savings vehicles. Like in the US, we have a health savings account. So saving for the future, saving for your future self, saving for your current self so that when you have an emergency, you have some funds, and feeling comfortable with your living expenses. You want that money to go, and depending on your business type and what country you're in, is going to change how you pay yourself. And so you want to have that. The last one I have that's really my basic things you need to know is understanding the difference between cash and profit. So let's say I saw a bunch of clients and I brought in $15,000, and then I paid about $6,000 of bills for advertising, insurance, billing, whatever I did. So I've got $9,000 in profit. Well, then I go to my bank account and I only see $6,000 and I'm confused. If I made $9,000, why is there not $9,000? Well, maybe you had expenses from prior months that you paid the credit card off this month. Maybe you paid some taxes. Maybe you already paid yourself a portion of that $9,000. So what is in your bank account isn't necessarily what your profit's going to show. And you need to kind of understand that those are different numbers unless you hadn't taken any money out. Day one of your business, you don't take any money out. You make $9,000 after you pay the bill. So you're going to have $9,000 in there. But other stuff runs through your account, like taxes and paying yourself and paying a business credit card or moving money into retirement that isn't going to be reflected in your profit because your profit is still your profit. And so when you go to pay yourself, you want to understand the difference. So you go like, well, I made 9,000, but I only have six. So clearly I can't pay myself nine. Or I made 9,000 and I have to pay 3,000 in taxes. So I better not pay myself nine. And when you can really understand the difference between the cash in the bank and the profit, even if you have to really look on it on paper, like, well, what did I have at the beginning of the month? Then the 15 came in, and then I paid six in bills, and then what else went out? Even if you have to just sit there and look at all the numbers, you want to understand that. Now, again, that's not a day one goal, but it is an important thing for practice owners to master within maybe the first 1 or 2 years, if you can. Estimated taxes, I usually say, give yourself 3 years to feel comfortable. The first year, I don't know what I'm doing. The second year, I think I might know what I'm doing, but I don't really know what I'm doing. The third year, okay, I think it's working out. I got it. So over the first 1 to 3 years, these are the things that you're going to want to try to figure out and feel like you mastered it.
I agree with that. My first year in practice was probably the hardest when it come to the accounting side and the bookkeeping side, because even though I had an accountant from day one, it's not until you file the end of the year that the accountant even knows what you're doing. So as you're trying to find, what do I do? Which way do I want to organize my bookkeeping? Am I using QuickBooks? Am I using an Excel form? I'm actually old school. I do my own bookkeeping, but I use an Excel form. I tried QuickBooks. For me, it didn't work. I just didn't know how to use it and it just was too complicated. So Excel, I still do it to this day because it's easier for me. And then I submit it to my accountant. But even something you mentioned, I think it was one of the first tasks is, are you doing your own bookkeeping? You can still do your own bookkeeping and then still have an accountant for end year taxes and submitting. So you don't have to like choose just one. You can actually have your accountant do your bookkeeping too. It's going to cost you, but you could have an accountant do that as well. And usually if you hire an accountant to do it, it is going to be a lot more than even if you paid a bookkeeper or did it yourself.
And that's a distinction that a lot of people don't realize. And I assume it's similar in Canada. Someone who is doing taxes tends to be a skilled profession. People have an exam they have to pass, and there's a couple different types of certifications in the US, but generally there's a lot of education involved because tax codes are written by the government, so they tend to be very complex. So you have this skilled profession, and you're usually going to pay a fair amount, but the taxes are generally done once a year. The bookkeeping is done all throughout the year, and bookkeepers mostly use software. There are a lot of bookkeepers who are not accountants because you don't need to understand accounting. Just like you go into your EHR and day one of your EHR, you're like, well, I don't know how to work this EHR, but I know that there's somewhere in here for notes and there's somewhere in here for a treatment plan and there's somewhere here to do billing. And so you need to find it and you figure it out. Well, people can learn how to use accounting software without having any accounting degree because the accounting software does half the work for you. And the things that you need that you learn in training to become an accountant, you have to know all these nuances that the software is just like, well, just tell me this part and it goes in the background and does the rest of it. So bookkeeping is not always done by a skilled or trained professional. I mean, some training, but not necessarily highly skilled.
I look at bookkeepers as really the organization, like they're organizing all the information. So then it goes to the accountant who then does all of the tax related pieces. Something else I encourage, and I'm assuming it's probably similar in the US, is finding a CPA who has understanding in the healthcare setting. Like yourself, for instance, you know the therapy world. My accountant specifically works with physicians, but he's very up on the regulations and the requirements and the tax laws connected to healthcare professionals. Because here in Canada, certain professions are exempt from charging GST or sales tax. And with that, not every accountant really knows that, especially if they have never worked with a healthcare professional. So it's really important to know that your accountant knows these tax laws, knows these things that are related to healthcare professionals and therapists specifically.
That's a good point. In the US, though, businesses that probably is more similar to a therapy business than any other business is a tax practice. But a lot of tax professionals do not think outside the box. They don't realize it. So I'll say all the time to a US-based tax professional, well, therapy business is very much like a tax business. And they're like, what? And I'm like, you see clients, you charge them a fee, It's a service fee. And in the US, most services are exempt from sales tax, so they're under similar laws. One of your biggest costs is outfitting your office, so furniture, and your training. And hiring is very similar. They have group tax practices. But if you don't have a tax professional who either knows your business or understands how to take their knowledge and translate it into understanding your business. So if you have a tax professor, oh, I don't understand therapy business. I had someone actually tell me once, their tax professor, you need to go find someone who understands the therapy business. And I'm like, I would love to get them on the phone and say, your business is so similar. If you could open your mind a little bit and see how their a profit and loss for a tax practice look almost identical, except the label of the income to a therapy practice. So that's something to consider for people who are in the US too.
Well, I think this is great information because we have listeners from both Canada and the US, so it's important to create those distinctions. So, do you have any additional advice, insights, or tips for listeners about mastering the practice basics?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that's important is that confidence does not come from knowing everything. You don't have to know everything to feel confident. Confidence comes from knowing that you can figure it out. You have trusted people to ask. The people that you are asking don't just tell you what to do, they tell you why they're recommending it. And they give you a comfort level. And when there was something as a choice, they give you the pros and cons. And that you aren't just operating your business what people say that you should do. Also, give yourself time to learn it. You didn't become a therapist overnight. How long did it take you to become a therapist? And how long did it take you to feel confident as a therapist? It takes time. So be patient with yourself to work towards that mastering and confidence level so that when you are unsure, whenever we go into uncharted waters, we are uncomfortable. But then we want to, over time, build the confidence and become comfortable. So give yourself that time. Don't just give up because you tried it and it didn't work. Like you said, you tried QuickBooks, it wasn't for you. You just found the spreadsheet, you found your place, that's what worked. Great, it still works. So give yourself that time and that figuring it out. Don't keep trying to put a square peg through a round hole. If it's not working, it's not working. There are lots of different ways to do your bookkeeping, to calculate your estimated taxes, to understand a lot of these basics. So knowing that you're giving yourself that time to figure it out and then being able to change it over time. Because for some people, the spreadsheet was great, but then they started a group practice and now it's a little bit unwieldy and they didn't like QuickBooks, but now they're going to need to learn it. Just like learning your EHR, if you have a little training on the software, it's going to be a little easier. So over time, you need to shift and you need to adjust. If it stops working, if it's still working, don't mess with it. But if it stops working, give yourself permission to explore new options and see what might work instead and try other things.
I love that. Jennie, if listeners want to learn more about your services and reach out to you, how can they?
So the best place is go to my website, simpleprofit.com. And the first thing is join the Simple Guide, which is free. It's basically like a free membership. There are a lot of frequently asked questions. For the tax piece, it's US based because I only am an expert on US accounting. But for the bookkeeping part, a lot of that is going to be very similar between US and Canada. So like anything, get the information and take what you need and leave what is not useful to you. And then also on my website, I have a blog with a lot of content and topics. And I have a starting your business page, which is the 10 things you need to go through when you're starting your business. Or if after the fact you didn't really thoughtfully go through that process, just go back whenever and then say, okay, did I miss anything? So on my website, tons and tons of free resources. I also have a low cost membership. And that is also found on my website. That's a paid version, but you can ask unlimited questions. I have tutorials and handouts and spreadsheets that you can download and use, and you can get support for using them as well as coaching.
Amazing. So to check out Jennie's website, go to simpleprofit.com. That's simpleprofit.com. Or you can simply scroll down to the show notes and click on the link. Also, Jennie has a really good Facebook group too. So if you are on Facebook, type in Simple Profit and join her group. It is amazing. That's actually how I met you. So I'm so grateful for your group and it is amazing.
On Facebook, look for Simple Profit for mental health clinicians because it'll come up under mental health clinicians. The Facebook group is only clinicians. Everything on my website, any small business. So if you have friends that own a fitness studio or are physical therapists or any of those other similar type professions, they can go to my website and access everything there as well.
Amazing. Jennie, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today to discuss the top tasks practice owners need to master to be successful in business. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into today's episode, and I hope you join me again soon on the Designer Practice Podcast. Until next time, bye for now. Please be advised that the podcast advertisements and links in this episode may be affiliate and or sponsor links where Evaspare Inc. and the Designer Practice Podcast receive compensation for sales or signups made through link clicks. This helps the Designer Practice Podcast continue to provide free and valuable content to you each week. Thank you, and we appreciate your support.